Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ask Tom Database Security for May of 2020. This month's topic is Oracle Data Safe, and I put mid-year update, but it's really been about 8 months since we released this service, and we're going to walk through what it does now. We'll talk about the growth along the way and some lessons that we've learned through working with the many customers that have deployed this. Before we get started, though, just some housekeeping. If we talk about something that's coming in the future, and I'll do that twice here in just a few minutes, it's not here until it's here, so you shouldn't buy anything based on what we think is on our roadmap. You always want to make your purchasing decisions based upon what the product does right now. We do record these calls, and they're available on the Ask Tom page, the same one you went to log into this. If you click on all sessions, you can see the previous recordings. We've been doing these for about 2 years now, believe it or not. And we've got a good amount of content up there on everything from transparent data encryption to Key Vault to Database Vault to DataSafe. So, if you've got a little bit of time and you want to brush up on some database security topics, it's a great resource that's available for you. Ask Tom's designed to give you just a glance into product development here at Oracle. You'll always have at least 1 or 2 product managers on. Today we have several because we're covering a lot of ground, and we're here to answer your questions. We'll talk a little bit about product announcements, and then we'll dive into a technical topic and Q&A at the end. When we do get to Q&A, you are not limited to just today's technical topics. So if you have a question on something else having to do with database security, please feel free to ask it. You're not limited to just DataSafe. And to ask a question, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. Just click on that button and you can enter your question. We'll try and answer it as we go along, and then we'll review all the questions that we got in at the end. All right? A couple of product announcements. First one, really excited to be releasing Key Vault 18.4. You can look for this next week. You should be able to download it next week. And we've got some nice new things in 18.4. We've expanded our support for using a hardware security module as the root of trust. Up until now, we've supported Talus and Encipher, but Utamako joins the family of supported HSMs. And that'll help any of you that are using Utamako HSMs. We've also improved our support for the existing HSMs by adding in token labels. So with token labels in Key Vault, if you are using something like Encipher with smart cards, you can now put the token for the smart card in, and you'll be able to use that instead of consuming the entire partition of the HSM. Same thing with Talus. We now, with token labels, support partitions in Talus. So just some nice enhancements there. If you've used Key Vault, you've probably noticed that the console times out after a certain amount of time, and this is fairly standard, but up until now, that console timeout has been a fixed idle time timeout. You couldn't adjust it. With this latest release, we'll be exposing the setting for console timeout. We're going to default that to 10 minutes, but you can set it to longer or shorter depending upon your company's requirements. One of the big new things, though, in Key Vault 18.4, and you can see a little demo playing on the screen here, is we've added in the capability, or I should say we've made it very easy to use the capability to retrieve secrets from Key Vault and use those to do things like log into a database. So in this particular use case, what we're doing is we're pulling passwords out of a batch file. We don't want to have passwords in a batch file. Instead, the password for the database login resides in Key Vault. Now, we've been able to do this for a while using secure external password stores, but secure external password stores always had the risk of placing the wallet for the secure external password store on the same server as the database that you were using with, or the client that you were using it with. By putting your passwords into Key Vault, you don't have that credential file sitting there on the server, and so there's less chance of it being compromised. There's another advantage. because it's in a centralized location, and remember, Key Vault replicates up to 16 nodes globally. Because it's in a centralized location, any client that needs to pull that password goes to Key Vault to get it. And if you update the password, you change it in Key Vault, and all clients get the updates instantly. So all of this and more is coming next week in Key Vault 18.4. Take a look at the What's New section in the Administrator's Guide to get more details. A little bit more quick than that, tomorrow actually we'll be releasing Database Security Assessment Tool version 2.2.1. This is a minor upgrade where the current version is 2.2.0, but we've done things like making DataSafe more autonomous aware. There's a lot of security built into Autonomous Database beyond just parameters, and Database Security Assessment Tool is now aware of those and will skip findings that are not applicable to Autonomous Database, so you get less false positives. We've gone through for our existing findings, and we've updated the severity rankings for many of those. Prior to this, some of the rankings we used were putting findings as severe or critical, when industry norms would have it be a little bit lower ranking. We've adjusted our rankings to be more in accordance with those industry norms, and that means that as you share a report with an auditor or with your CIO or something like that, that they're seeing something that's more along the lines of what they're used to seeing. We're always updating with every version findings. We add in new findings and update the contents of those. We've done that for user session, for unified audit, and we've improved our checks for public privilege grants. Database Security Assessment Tool can be downloaded from My Oracle Support, and you see the note number on the screen here. Speaking of My Oracle Support, there is a note on My Oracle Support for working with Key Vault and MySQL transparent data encryption. If you happen to be using Key Vault with Oracle Database and you have some MySQL out there that you're also encrypting, you may not know that Key Vault also works with MySQL. This note walks you through setting it up step by step. Really good example of how to use Key Vault beyond just the Oracle Database. I'd mentioned earlier the Database Security Assessment Tool. That'll be updated tomorrow with the new link for the new version of the Database Security Assessment Tool. And finally, when it comes to searching My Oracle Support, there's built-in search into My Oracle Support, but a lot of people prefer Google. We have allowed Google to index the contents of My Oracle Support. And if you want to use Google to search it, just prefix your search with site:/support.oracle.com, and you can look for whatever you want. For example, if tomorrow you want to try and download DBSAT, just go site:/support.oracle.com, download DBSAT, and you'll see the very first link that pops up is the link to download the Database Security Assessment Tool. So nice kind of feature, right? Today's topic is DataSafe, and just want to talk about a few documentation updates for DataSafe. One thing that we've done is we've made the documentation easier to find. Most of us, we think of DataSafe in terms of database security, and so we have exposed the DataSafe documentation in database-related products under database security. So if you go to docs.oracle.com, click on Oracle Database, in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see related products. Click on that and scroll down to database security, and there's your DataSafe documentation. Once you are on your DataSafe documentation, if you look in the left, you'll see a link for Learn Oracle DataSafe. This link will take you to a self-guided walkthrough of Oracle DataSafe and allow you to exercise the most commonly used functions in DataSafe. That's it for announcements, and it takes us to our technical topic for today, which again is DataSafe. Just a reminder, as we're going through, if you've got a question, you'll see a little Q&A button on your Zoom window. Just click Q&A and enter the question into Q&A. There's several product managers on. We've even got product development on as well. And they will help answer those questions as we go along. We'll review all of the questions at the end of the session. So let's talk about DataSafe. DataSafe, we introduced it back in September, and DataSafe started as, here's kind of how the conversation went. We have autonomous database, and autonomous database does everything for us autonomously, and you don't have to do anything yourself. Well, that's not really true, because there's some things that we can't do for you, especially from a security standpoint in autonomous. What are those things you can't do for me? Well, if you fill your database with credit card numbers, I don't look at your data, so I don't know it's full of credit card numbers, so I don't know you need to apply permissions and security appropriate to a bunch of credit card numbers. Or if you fill your database full of healthcare data, I don't know it's full of healthcare data. And there's rules around how that data gets treated. Another thing we can't do for you is if you create users in your autonomous database and you grant those users access to data, I have no way of knowing whether the access you granted them is the right access or the wrong access. You've done it. I have to assume what you want to do. And finally, when those users begin using that data, as they begin selecting, inserting, updating, deleting, we at Oracle don't know whether what they're doing is what they should be doing or not. We know you created the user, you gave the user permission to do stuff, and they're doing the stuff you gave them permission to do. So all of that stuff around putting the data in, managing the users, granting permissions, while monitoring their activity, this is all stuff that falls onto the customer side of the shared responsibility model. But we didn't want to just toss this over the fence and say, okay, Mr. Customer, it's up to you to do this. So we developed DataSafe to give our customers the tools they need to do their part of shared responsibility. And that is at the core of what DataSafe is. DataSafe is included with their database services. We don't charge extra for DataSafe. You can use it with the Oracle databases in the cloud, and that's all good. We announced DataSafe back in September. Larry announced it in one of his keynotes, and if I remember correctly, it was on a Tuesday. And within just a day or so of Larry making the announcement, and we were really talking about autonomous database, we started getting requests to expand beyond autonomous database. I want to use DataSafe with Exadata Cloud Service, or I want to use it with DBAS, or I want to use it with my ExaCloud at Customer, or I want to use it with my on-premises database. So since September, we've been gradually expanding the databases that DataSafe works with. Today, this is what we do. We do autonomous database, both data warehouse and transaction processing, and we do that with public IP addresses. We do database systems, both bare metal and virtual, and we'll do that with public or private IP addresses, and we do Exadata Cloud Service, public and private IP addresses. But we are constantly expanding support. We're adding in support for Standard Edition, and you can look forward to seeing that sometime in the future. We have a limited availability program going right now for Exadata Cloud at Customer. If you have a customer who's running ExaCC and you think they'd be interested in DataSafe, please reach out to one of your product managers. We would love to talk with your customer because we want to get them kicking the tires on this as soon as we can. So lots of things that we've added in. We've also added in support for private IP addresses, and this is fairly recent. We announced this back, it was in March that we announced this. Private IP addresses have been a problem for DataSafe because DataSafe has to actually log into the database to do its work. It can't work from outside the service. It has to get in and actually connect to the database with a regular database session. So to make private IP addresses work, what the OCI team did is they created something called a private endpoint for us. And private endpoints allow us to basically add a component to your virtual network that lets DataSafe connect, but it doesn't go through the public internet. It's an internal connection, not routed anywhere else, so the data is never exposed anywhere. To get to private endpoints, you would go to your console. You would go to DataSafe. If you go to DataSafe, by the way, and you don't see something that looks like this, make sure you enable DataSafe. That's sort of a first step in doing anything, is you have to enable DataSafe. You'd click on private endpoints, and you would just say, I want to create a private endpoint. You give your private endpoint a name. We'll call it Bob. You tell it which VCN you want to collect to. You choose a subnet within there. Subnets are usually interroutable between them unless you've created security rules preventing that. I typically will choose the subnet where most of my databases reside. I create most of my database in availability domain 2, so that's what I use. Everything else is optional. If you want to add in security group rules, you can do that. If you want to give it its own assigned private IP, you can do that, but you don't have to do any of that stuff unless you have configured your network to require these things. That's all it takes to create a private endpoint, though. Okay, easy as can be. Once you have network connectivity available for DataSafe, if you've got public IP addresses, you don't have to do anything. If you've got private IP addresses, that means a private endpoint. The next step is to register your database with DataSafe. Now, how you do that depends on what kind of database you're using. If you're using one of the autonomous databases, then when you go to the Autonomous Database console, in the lower right-hand corner, you will see a section for DataSafe, and you'll just click Register. When you click Register, that connects the Autonomous Database to DataSafe, creates the entry in DataSafe, it creates a user within the Autonomous Database, and grants that user privileges. We'll come back to user and privileges in just a second. If you're running one of the other database cloud services, then you're going to do it manually. So you're going to go into DataSafe, you're going to say you want to add a target, and you're going to give it the information about that target. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So I'll go to DataSafe, I'll go up here to targets, and I'll say I want to register a new target. When I register a new target, I give it a target name. The only type of database that we support right now is cloud databases. We don't support on-premises databases yet. And if you're not in development, you won't see this option. But you might expect that at some point we're going to be releasing for cloud databases. Or for on-premises databases. You give it a target description. That's arbitrary. If you're using compartments or resource groups, you select your compartment. If this database has a private IP address, you select private IP and your endpoint. If it doesn't have a private IP address, you don't do that. You give it the OCID for the database. You tell it what type of connection you're going to use. Most of the cloud services use TCP. Autonomous uses TLS, but Autonomous does all the setup for you, so you don't have to worry about it. IP address, port number, and service name. Then you just give it the database user name and password that you're going to use for this database. Now, database username. DataSafe has to connect in as a database user. When you register an autonomous database, we automatically create a user called DS$admin. We give that user a randomly generated strong password, and we set up all of the privileges for that user. Well, we set it up so he's ready to be granted privileges. We don't give him all the privileges he needs. We'll come back to that in a second. For all other databases, you have to do that manually. So you're going to create a user. You can call that user DS$admin. You can call it whatever you want to. Make sure you give the user a table space and make sure you give them a secure password. Okay. Now, once you've got that user created, you have to give that user the appropriate privileges. For autonomous database, you grant privileges to the user using a package called ds-target-util, and there's a procedure grant role. There are 5 roles for DataSafe that you can grant to a user. You can give them the assessment role, the audit collection role, the audit setting role, the data discovery role, and the data masking role. The same thing is true for non-autonomous databases, but there, the package doesn't already exist for you. You're going to run a script. So you'll download a script and you'll run it and you'll give it arguments. And the arguments are, what user am I working with? Do I want to grant or revoke privileges? And what privileges do I want to grant or revoke? Just like with autonomous database, there is an assessment privilege, an audit collection privilege, an audit setting privilege, a data discovery privilege, and a masking privilege. Now, masking is something you never want to grant to a production database. So I normally will have masking commented out on my procedure for autonomous database. And in non-autonomous database, I'll grant all and then revoke masking. Okay. But we'll come back to masking and talk more about why you never want to grant the privileges. Again, in terms of getting that script, it's right here on the registration page. You download the script and then you just run it with the arguments we gave you. Once your target is registered, there are now 6 things that you should do. And every time you register a new database with DataSafe, you should do these 6 things. And I like to do these 6 things in the order you see here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to validate my audit data collection, and I'll do that over in the settings menu. The next thing I'll do is create an audit trail. I'll do that in the targets menu. Then I'm going to retrieve and edit, if necessary, my audit policies. I do that under activity auditing. Then I'll run security assessment, user assessment, and sensitive data discovery. I do these 6 things, and at the end of those 6 things, the database is up and running and ready to use within DataSafe. Okay. The first of those is validate audit collection settings and retention interval. Let's take a look at that. To get to audit collection settings, I go to settings. In settings, there's 3 things I want to look at. The first one is, do I collect audit data for all targets after reaching the limit? In other words, am I going to start paying to use DataSafe? DataSafe is free in the cloud. And with DataSafe, we allow you to collect up to 1 million audit records per database per month. If your database generates more than 1 million audit records per month, you have 2 choices. You can either collect up to 1 million records and then stop collecting, in which case you never get charged, or you can say, I want to continue collecting after I reach 1 million, in which case you would get charged. Now the charge is very small. It's 10 cents for every 10,000 records. It's right there on the price list. And so, if you collect 1,200,000 or 1,020,000 records, you're going to get charged 20 cents. If you collect 1,200,000 records, you're going to get charged a couple of bucks. It's not a lot of money that we're talking about here, but we don't want to surprise our customers. So we advise them, decide, are you going to allow it to go into paid usage or not? This is a global setting. You can then, if you choose not to go into paid usage, you can choose to override the global setting. Let me just sort these. And for any individual database, allow that database to go over. So all databases cannot go into paid usage except for the ones that I have given exception authority to. That's the second choice you make. Do I override? The third choice you make is, how long do I want DataSafe to store audit data for? We can store audit data for anywhere between 1 and 12 months. Here I've got it set for 1 month. That's my policy. I want to have a month's worth of audit data online. DataSafe lets me do that easily. Okay? So this is the first thing you do after registering a target, is you make sure you understand the money. Am I going to pay for extra audit collection or not? Set that up, make sure that the audit data retention matches my needs. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an audit trail. And to do that, we'll go up to Targets, Audit Trails, and Add. Now, when we do this, we've got another choice to make. I'm going to show you this screen in a second, and you're going to see this little button here. Do I want to automatically purge audit data from the target after it's collected? Let's take a look at that, and I'll tell you why that's important. I'll go to Targets, Audit Trails, and Add. The first thing I do is I select the database that I'm adding the audit trail for. Let's do this here for this database. And I get to say where the trail location is. We're really focused a lot on unified audit here, but if your database is not in unified audit mode, we can collect from standard audit. We can collect database fault audit or fine-grained auditing. But unified audit is definitely our core design center. But now comes that decision. Do I purge or do I not purge? If I click this button, then what I'm telling DataSafe is when you collect audit data, after you've grabbed the audit data from the database you're monitoring and put it into the DataSafe repository, delete the audit data from the system you collected it from. That means you return that space to the database service, which means that you can use that space for other things without getting charged for it. You know, most people don't want to have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years of audit data just sitting there on their database, you know, paying for storage. But there's a downside to this, and that is DataSafe does exactly what you tell it to do. It's a very polite service that way. If you tell it to automatically purge data, it's going to do that. Now, suppose I've just connected a database to DataSafe. I've registered the database, and in the audit trail, I have 2 years worth of audit data. So that's on the database. There's 2 years worth of audit data. And I create my audit trail, and I begin bringing that data into DataSafe, and I have auto purge turned on. You may remember when we were looking at settings, my retention is set to 1 month. So here's what's going to happen. I register my audit trail. I pull in 2 years worth of audit data. I delete 2 years worth of audit data from the target. There's now no audit data left out there but the new stuff. In DataSafe, there is now 2 years worth of audit data, but my retention interval is 1 month. So the next time the retention job runs to check and see if there's any audit data that needs to be purged out of DataSafe, it'll say, oh, you have 1 year and 11 months of data you don't need. And it will remove 1 year and 11 months of data, leaving you with just what your retention interval is set to, 1 month. That data is now gone. You can't see it in the database because you had auto purge turned on, and you said not to keep it in DataSafe because you set your retention interval to 1 month. So our recommendation is leave auto purge off when you first register a database. Once you're sure that you're seeing the data you want within DataSafe and that you don't need that older data within the database, purge that data from your database. Use DBMS Auto Management, purge that data from your database because you don't want it to be all brought into DataSafe. Turn on Auto Purge Trail, and now you'll keep your database clean and you're not going to have any surprises. Okay? So that is the second thing you're going to do. You're going to set up how long you want to keep audit data for. Do you want to be paid for it or not? You're going to create your audit trail. The third thing you want to do after registering a target is you want to retrieve the audit policies. You want to find out how is auditing configured in this database now, and you may want to make changes to those audit policies. So let's take a look at that. To retrieve audit data, I'm going to click on Activity Auditing. I am going to select my database. I'm going to continue. I'll select my database again and tell DataSafe to retrieve. DataSafe is now logging into that database and it is looking at the audit settings, and this will only take like 30 or 40 seconds. And as soon as it comes back, I'll be able to see how the audit is configured in that database. I click Continue, and I can now go in and look at audit data. I have basic auditing turned on. I'm auditing administrator activity. I've selected a couple of additional policies, and I'm doing some alerting. Let's look at that and see, get more detail. We click into the database, and we can see we're looking for critical activity. We're looking for when people log in. If I wanted to, I could say, look, exclude people from my login tracking. Maybe I don't want to look at, say, DS$admin, for example, or maybe I have a batch process that does a lot of connections. I can get rid of that. I look for schema changes because you almost always want to audit DDL. You almost always want to add it audit administrator activity. If I've got a list of users that are particularly sensitive, I can say that I want to audit those. If I've created custom policies within my database, I can enable and disable those custom policies. I can enable and disable the default policies that are shipped with the database. And I can set myself up to do CIS benchmarks. We've got alerting turned on by default. If I want to turn any of these alerts off, I can do that, but we normally just leave those the way they are. So I've now retrieved my audit settings and I'm ready to do the fourth thing you should do whenever you register a database with DataSafe, and that is run a security assessment. To run a security assessment, I'm going to click on Security Assessment, select my databases, and say to assess. And basically what's happening is DataSafe has functionality that is very similar to the database security assessment tool. DataSafe will go out and collect the information from the database, and it'll report, you've got this setting that's a little different from what we recommend, you've granted these privileges, you might want to consider those. It'll tell you what's going on. Once you've got your assessment, you read through your assessment and you determine, is there anything in this database that I want to fix? Like maybe I want to revoke some privileges or drop a user or change some password policies. When I've got the database the way I want it to, I reassess the database again, but this time I click Set Baseline and I tell DataSafe, this is what I want to look for if my database security posture changes, I want you to let me know. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So we go back to the DataSafe console, we click on Security Assessment, and I have already run my first assessment. So I've run an assessment here in the RUS ATP database, and I've got a couple of risks here, but I've decided these are acceptable. And in fact, remember I said DBSAT is changing to be more autonomous aware. These two findings, they're not real findings. They're not something that's actually concerned with. The sample schema table space is not encrypted. It's sample data, nobody cares, and you can't put other data in there because it's read-only. The undo table space isn't encrypted, but data that goes into the undo table space from an encrypted table space is encrypted because that's how undo works. So that's not a real finding. There's also some directories that are left open. However, there are no executables in these directories. We've already checked that. So in a non-autonomous database, you would want to go check these and make sure that there was no security issue here. That's already been done. The new version of DBSAT will remove these findings, and that will shortly roll its way into DataSafe, and these will be gone. So here I've got a pretty clean system, right? Now, I've decided that's my baseline. So I have this set as my baseline. And if I go and do another assessment, I'll now see if anything has changed since I ran my baseline. And instead of having to review the entire report and go through all that decision making, once I've done that once, all I have to do is see what the delta is, where the changes are. And this is really, really powerful for a security team to check configuration once and then just have reporting on delta, what's changed. Now, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. It just so happens that once this finishes, it's going to find that somebody who shall not be named has granted select any table to public. I don't know why you would ever grant select any table to public. That's a really bad security practice, and I sure hope that DataSafe finds it. We go back to DataSafe. Our assessment is still running. It'll be done in just a few more seconds, and when it's done, because I did that grant, we should see this no turn to a yes. So we're just going to stall for about 10, 15 more seconds. And during a demo, everything seems like it just takes forever here. Notice that my no has turned to yes. I can look at the report. And if I want to go in, I can see where before I had no high risks, now I do. But I don't have to do that because all I have to do is click on that word yes. And I must be in the wrong database there. I must have clicked the wrong database. Hang on a second. Rus ATP. Click on this yes, and you can see somebody has granted select any table to public. Now, I have a choice. If that was a legitimate grant, if that's how I want to run with my database, I set this new assessment as my baseline. And now if something changes from that, I'll find out about it. But a better choice in this case would be to go back and revoke select any table from public and rerun my assessment. And once my assessment reruns, I should see I'm back to my baseline and my yes flips back to a no. We're going to let this run in the background. We'll come back to it in a few seconds and look at it. And we'll move on to the fourth thing you want to do whenever you register a database. And that is you want to run a user assessment. Much like security assessment, user assessment looks at how your database is set up. But here, instead of looking at configuration, we're looking at users. What users are in your database? What privileges do they have? When's the last time they logged in? When did they change their password last? And we take all of that information and we assign a risk score to that user. The reason we do this is most database breaches happen through a compromised account. The risky accounts, the ones that are the highest level of risk, are the ones that could do the most damage if that account were compromised. So let's go take a look at user assessment. We just finished. Our yes flipped back to no. We go to user assessment. And I've already run this, but if I hadn't, I would just click on Rus ATP and assess. I don't want to spend a lot of time watching the wheel spin around. Here's what my report looks like. Okay, I've got some users in this database. Some of them are critical risk, and these are users who have DBA privileges or database vault privileges or audit admin. They just have really high levels of privileges. Let's see, why is Evil Eve critical? She probably has, oh, she has select any table, so that's a very high level of privilege. And you have users that are less privileged. Like, look at poor innocent little Russ here. Russ is never a threat. That's why he's very low risk. We can look into Russ. Russ's privileges are no roles granted. Russ has one privilege that he can create a session. This is a guy you don't have to worry about. And you can look, Russ's password's expired. Russ hasn't even logged in a while. You know, this guy's definitely not a threat, although you might want to consider dropping this user, you know, because if he's not logging in, why does he have an account there, right? Now, let's contrast that with a user who's critical risk. We'll look at admin. Admin's the super user in the autonomous database. He has all the roles. He has all the privilege. This is a guy who could hurt you. Admin has been doing some stuff. We can look in because we've configured auditing and see what has admin done. And so we see that admin just revoked create session or select any table from public. And not too long before that, admin had granted select any table from public. So we get to see what was done, where it was done from. This is basically the audit information, but it's tied to the user. Very easy to get at. Security assessments is really powerful. It's something you want to show your users. Let me just, let's see here. Oh, we have to get into the assessment, I'm sorry. So in our report, we can see again who the user is, what their privileges are. We can drill down to see what their activity is. We can see what their last login time was. We can add in and say that we want to see when they changed their password last. Did I not do that? I did. Oh, I have to scroll over, sorry. We can see when they last changed their password. Really, really powerful tool, easy to use. So that's user assessment. It was the fourth thing we want to do whenever we register a target with DataSafe. The next thing we want to do, I'm sorry, that was the fifth thing. The next thing we want to do is we want to perform sensitive data discovery. And the reason we want to do sensitive data discovery is all the security things that we've talked about till now, these are mostly baseline security things. we always encrypt an autonomous database. You always want strong passwords. You never want to have overprivileged users. But if you've got a ton of PCI type data in there, or healthcare data, or your entire customer database, you have other types of controls you may need to put in place. And that all starts with knowing what data is in your database. So DataSafe allows for sensitive data discovery, and we're going to look at how that works now. Sensitive data discovery is driven from a library of sensitive data types. And when you first enable DataSafe, you'll find over 120 different types of sensitive data that we have pre-configured for you to look at. Those types will look at things like Canadian social insurance number. And as it's scanning through your database looking for Canadian social insurance number, it'll look for column names that match a certain pattern, or column comments that match a pattern, or data that is set up into a certain format. And if it finds something that looks like it's a Canadian social insurance number, and you've told it to scan for it, it will tell you, hey, I think this may be a Canadian social insurance number, and go take a look at it. We ship with a lot of different data types, but the reality is no matter what we do, we'll never have everything that every customer wants. Customers have their own way of doing account numbers, or representing usernames, or having an address defined. And so we give you the ability to add new sensitive data types to DataSafe. You can either do that from scratch, typing in all your own regular expressions, or if you're a lazy person like me, you can pick one of our pre-shipping sensitive data types that's close to what you want, and then just edit it. And so when you edit it, you'll change the regular expression to be close to what you want, the comments, the data patterns, and everything. And when you create a new sensitive data type, you also say, how do you want to mask that if you find it? We'll talk more about this later when we get into the masking section, but the fact that we have pre-associated a default masking format with a sensitive data type makes things a lot easier as we continue working with DataSafe. Okay? So that's the sensitive data library. Let's go do sensitive data discovery. So we'll click into sensitive data discovery. We'll select our database. I'm going to pick a different database that has some interesting information in it, and we'll go ahead and continue. Sensitive data discovery has to go out and scan the database. And when it scans the database, how long it takes to run depends on how much data is in the database, how much data you said to look at, and what types of data you said to scan for. I'm just going to give this a name. So this will be, let's see, Russ, if I can spell my own name, lab, and this is on, I'm going to run this on PDB1. My database is in the DBSAT Rust compartment, and now I have a decision. Do I show and save sample data? If I click this button, when I do my sensitive data discovery and I find something that looks like it's sensitive data, I will bring back into DataSafe one value from that column, so that the person who's reviewing it can see, yes, I think this is a social security number, and here's a sample that you can see that says, yes, this is, or no, this isn't a social security number, just so you can put a little bit more human in there. I'm going to go ahead and show and save sample data this time. I'll click continue. If I want to, I can scan the entire database. This is a live demo, not a recording, so I'm not going to do that because the more I scan, the longer it takes. I'm just going to look at two schemas. Remember all those different types of sensitive data? They're all here. I can scan for everything, but I don't really want to do that because, again, live demo, it takes a while to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scan for one type of data, and what I'm going to look for is first names. Okay? I'll say to go out and search for first names, and that scan is running now. I'm looking for two schemas, just a few tables. It's a pretty small database, so this is only going to take a little while. I'm searching employee search prod. We wait a few seconds. A few more seconds. Come on. There it is. Just had to wait long enough. Okay, so I've completed my sensitive data discovery. That would normally have been done in about a third of that time, by the way. Maybe the system's busy. I go in and look to see what was found. What was found was, like I said, I've got in two different schemas, employee search dev and employee search prod, two different tables, demo HR employees and demo HR users in both. And in each of those, I have a column called first name. The data that's in there, I chose to show sample data so I can see there's a Walter and a Can here. Now, it just so happens that I don't care about the users. I only care about the employees table. I can see there's 1,000 records in each of those. So I'm going to go ahead and produce my report just based on those two tables, those two columns. All right, this is as simple as it can get. I had one sensitive type, first name. It found two tables with two columns total for a total of 2,000 values. Easy as can be. Okay, let's go back and take a look. If you've gotten to here, if you've performed your sensitive data discovery and you've reviewed your results, you're now done with the 6 things that you should do for every database you register. Just to review those. Check your collection settings and retention interval. Make sure they're still right with the new database. Create an audit trail for that database. Retrieve your audit policies, and if you need to change them, that's a good time to change them. Maybe add more auditing in or maybe take some auditing out. Run a security assessment and set a baseline. Run a user assessment, look at your critical users, and perform sensitive data discovery. Now we're going to move on to something that you don't do in every database, and we're going to do data masking. The reason you don't do this in every database is masking destroys the original data. This is not redaction we're talking about. This is actually going in and changing the data that's stored in the database. It is not a recoverable operation. If you accidentally do this in production, you're going to wind up restoring from backup. And this is why we don't grant masking privileges to the data safe account in a production system. Now, masking requires sensitive data discovery. We just completed a sensitive data discovery job. Before you can mask, you always have to identify the sensitive data columns. And just like sensitive data discovery, masking jobs take time. How much time it takes depends on the number of columns you're masking, how much data is in those tables, and how complex your masking format is. We start masking by making sure we have the necessary privileges. If we didn't grant the privileges before we registered or when we registered the database, we need to do it now. In autonomous database, we use DS target util grant role, data masking role. In non-autonomous databases, we run our script. We say for the DS $admin user, grant masking privileges. Easy as that. All right. Let's just make sure we've got our privileges set up right. So here's the database I'm working with. I check. And sure enough, DS $admin does have the masking role. Let's take a look at our data before we mask it. And I'm looking at both the employee search prod and employee search dev, those two employee tables. So we look at that. And we can see right now in prod, there's a Jonathan Carter. In test, there's a Jonathan Carter. There's a Roy Kelly in Bo. There's a Tina Alexander. The data is the same because dev is a clone of prod. We don't want that. We don't want to be using production data in our development application. So we're going to continue to mask the data. We tell DataSafe which database we want to mask. I'll mask PDB1. I'm just going to mask the dev column first. So just one column in one table. Now, remember when we looked at the library and there was a default masking format associated with each sensitive data type? For first name, the default is to just put in some random characters. I don't want to do that. I want to try something different. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use deterministic encryption. Deterministic encryption is a feature we just updated recently within the last couple of weeks. Before this update, using deterministic encryption was really painful. You had to add a regular expression. You had to allow for what happens if the contents of the column were different lengths. It was really painful. Now, deterministic encryption is easy. All you've got to do is say you want to use deterministic encryption. Everything else is optional. If you want to make that output look in a certain pattern, you would use a regular expression, but if you don't, it'll just put in the characters, encrypted characters. So we're going to use deterministic encryption, and we're going to confirm our policy. This will take a few seconds. Hopefully it'll go quicker than our sensitive data discovery did. Much quicker. We're going to review it. And one last chance, this is not production, submit. We give it a seed key for encryption. I'm going to use the very secure Russ Lowenthal as my seed key. And I'm going to say to submit. Okay, we're off to the races now. We are looking at our database. We're starting our script generation. And in a few seconds, we'll start masking. And we're going to mask with blinding speed 1,000 rows in one table in one schema. This is about as easy a masking job as you're ever going to find. It's a good use case to use for the demo because it happens fairly quickly. While we're waiting for this to run, we go back. Again, we look at our data. Jonathan Carter, Lillian Evans, both in prod and in dev. Our masking has completed. Now let's rerun our query. We run our query, and we can see Roy is now Bima. Tina is now Kabim. Amy is now VII, I guess. Okay, so we've done this. Now remember I said I really like deterministic masking. Here is why I like deterministic masking. Deterministic masking means that if I mask a column and I have the same value and I mask again, the same input value will always produce the same output value. If you think about how most dev and test systems works, the developers will have set use cases that they're testing. So if I want to mask VII, I don't want to have a different test case every time someone clones production back to test and remasks. I always want to be able to see the same data. It's masked data, but I want it to be the same data. Determinism does this. So the work we put into making deterministic encryption easier was actually really important work. Let's go do a second masking run. And this time, instead of starting from sensitive data discovery, I've already done discovery, so I'm just going to use that data discovery run I did, and I'll remask PDB1. I will say to pick my masking from the library, or my, sensitive data discovery from the library. My database is in the Rust compartment. I'm going to use the sensitive data model that I just created a little bit ago. DataSafe will validate that sensitive data model, make sure it hasn't changed, nobody deleted columns or added columns. It usually doesn't take very long to do. And as expected, there are no new columns. We didn't make any schema changes, and we're going to continue. This time, instead of masking dev, we're going to mask prod. And again, we're going to do deterministic encryption. We don't need to give it any extra arguments. We'll just take the default. We'll confirm our policy. Schedule it to run. and submit. Again, we give it our key. And the masking job is running. We're going to let this run, and while it's running, I just want to give a quick, kind of a quick feel for what we're doing next month. Second Thursday next month is the 11th of June, and we're looking at 2 different topics right now. So it's either going to be Kerberos authentication. We're getting a lot of requests for Kerberos authentication as a way to integrate with Microsoft Active Directory, or it's going to be data redaction. We haven't talked about data redaction in a couple of years, so it's probably time to go again. One or the other of those, we haven't really decided which. If you subscribe to the second Thursday, the same website where you joined the session from, if you subscribe to it, you'll get notifications when we update the session descriptions, and that way you'll know what it's going to be. Let's see if our masking run has completed. Sure enough, it has completed. Again, we did 1 column, 1 table, but let's look at our data. When we rerun our query, Jonathan, Roy, these values will change. And notice that across different masking runs, the same input value produced the same output value. And what that means is I can get consistent testing even as I clone and reclone. So this recent change to deterministic masking, fantastic thing. So happy to see that. Really, DataSafe is just so much more powerful. Even just a few short months of development have really increased the value of DataSafe. Right, that ends the demo, that ends the presentation. We're now on to Q&A.